Welcome to the State of Ocean. My name is Pierre. I'm the head of outreach at REVOLVE. REVOLVE was founded in 2010. It's a media group focused on fostering cultures of sustainability. And alongside our quarterly publication of our award-winning magazine, we also offer a host of media services and communication services. Last year, REVOLVE created also an early career journalist fellowship for our Mediterranean platform called Amouage. We're proud to contribute to three particular initiatives we'll be diving into today: the EU Ocean Coalition, Blue Lights, and Towards IPOS. So, the ocean is all connected. Our actions impact the ocean, and it in turn influences us. We see this in the rising sea temperatures, pollution, and biodiversity loss, which threaten marine life in coastal communities. With 5 years left to meet the UN Sustainable Development Goals, SDG 14, which focuses on ocean conservation, remains the least funded and slowest moving. Despite this, 2025 is a turning point. Key deadlines for global ocean agreements are here. The world must act fast to implement the High Seas Treaty, or the Global Ocean Treaty. It needs to finalize the Global Plastics Treaty. As you might know, plastics are responsible for 80% of all marine pollution. We need to also enforce new rules on harmful fisheries subsidies. The EU Ocean Pact is also at critical stages as our discussions on deep sea mining. Major events in 2025 will push ocean action forward. The European Ocean Days start in 2 weeks, the UN Ocean Conference in France in June, and our Ocean Conference in South Korea and COP30 in Brazil. These will all shape marine policies. This is a chance for leaders, scientists, and advocates to make real progress. But success depends on global cooperation, bridging the knowledge gap, and scaling up solutions. I'm very delighted to have an exceptional panel of expert speakers here with us today to start off this discussion and open up an opportunity for you journalists to ask your questions today. So I'll quickly deep dive into that. So starting off, we have with us Tanya Brodie Rudolph. She is an international environmental and ocean lawyer based in South Africa. She's a research fellow at the Center for Sustainability Transitions in Stellenbosch and the co-lead of the Emerging International Platform for Ocean Sustainability. Tanya is an expert on the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy, a member of the advisory committee for the Global Once program, a member of Earth System Task Force, part of Women Leadership in Marine Technology and Science, and a member of Women's Actions for the Ocean Coalition. Welcome, Tanya. Francesca Santoro is the Senior Program Officer at the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO, where she oversees the ocean literacy initiatives. She previously coordinated the setting up of the Tsunami Early Warning System for the Northeastern Atlantic, Mediterranean, and Connected Seas. Before joining the IOC, Francesca was lecturer at the PhD program on Science and Management of Climate Change in Venice. Previously, she collaborated with several research centers as well. Welcome, Francesca.
Hello.
Pierre Strosser is an environmental economist with more than 20 years of experience in research and consultancy supporting ecological and climate transitions in Europe. He contributes today to initiatives like the EU Ocean Coalition, promoting ocean literacy across Europe, as well as Towards IPOS, which is enhancing science policy interface. And finally, Blue Lights as well, which integrates marine sustainability into education systems. Pierre holds a PhD and numerous other accolades and degrees. Welcome, Pierre.
Nice to be here.
Next up, Natalie Donback is an independent journalist based in Barcelona, Spain, covering stories around climate change, human rights, and politics for a range of international outlets. Her work has appeared in Time magazine, The Guardian, Devex, BBC, Context, Greece, Mongabe, many, many others. She's currently a fellow with the Magmatic School of Environmental Journalism, and her investigative work has received grant support from Journalism Fund Europe and Investigative Journalism for Europe. Welcome, Natalie.
Thanks so much. Nice to be here.
And finally, Nina Dietz is a young ocean advocate involved in the EU for Ocean Coalition. Together with colleagues, she has founded the association Blue Citizen and is implementing the EU-funded project Young Citizens Council for the Ocean. This brings together 15 young Europeans to take ocean policy positions and set up a Blue Citizenship Compass. Nina has authored, together with the illustrator Marika Helmond, the book project True Tales for Ocean Rebels, for which they received scientific support and also awarded the Best Youth Initiative of the Make EU Blue Awards in 2024. Nina currently works as project manager for climate and biodiversity initiatives at the GIZ, the German Development Cooperation Department. Welcome, everybody. We're very excited that we have this opportunity to engage with you today and to launch into a series of questions which hopefully will whet the appetite of the participants here today, and we'll make sure to engage you very briefly after we start off with the first round of questions. So, without further ado, what is the state of the ocean, the global ocean? Tanya, can I help ask you to introduce the subject to us today?
Yes, sure. Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's lovely to be here. It's such an important conversation, and it's something I feel so passionate about. So I'm very excited about being here to talk with you today about the ocean. You've sketched some of the background, Pierre, in your introduction, but I wanted to reiterate that life on Earth really depends on the ocean, on a healthy ocean, and that we have a problem because the ocean is in decline. There is increasing pressure from competing activities. There is exploitation, overexploitation of resources. There's rising pollution, as you mentioned, and accelerating climate change. Last year, I just to take a moment to sketch a picture for you. The Earth's crust is the largest reservoir of carbon. The second largest reservoir of carbon is the ocean. The ocean holds 40,000 billion tons of carbon, which is 40 times more than the atmosphere. And there is this constant exchange between atmosphere and the ocean. So if carbon rises in the atmosphere, it rises in the ocean too. And in one way, the ocean has always absorbed this carbon, and that's how ocean has mitigated climate change in the past. But we're starting to reach some limits because every degree of change acts as a risk multiplier for the Earth. Last year was the warmest on record, the warmest sea surface temperature ever on record. What was scary about that, though, was that it was unexpected. Scientists didn't predict the jump. We're used to breaking world records of devastation, but we're not used to scientists not even being able to predict the degree of change. And that was what was scary about the heat last year. And this is resulting in dramatic changes, of course, across ecosystems, sea level rise, ocean currents, weather. So there is so much uncharted territory that we're starting to venture into. And we need to be aware of these risks being amplified with all of these degrees of change that we're going through. What science is showing us is that we need an interconnected, holistic approach. All of this is so connected. And if we don't attend to that, we really are risking reaching limits, soft limits and hard limits. And I think it's really important that we keep up the pressure. It's been a really great year, and last year too, on ocean acceleration, on Blue Hope, with BB&J and the Plastics Treaty, and now the upcoming UNOC, which is focused on accelerating action, which is great for SDG 14. And I think it's really important to remember that humans have incredible imagination, incredible capacity. We can collaborate and communicate, we can inspire, and we can change. And this is the message that we all need to hold for this coming year so that we really make this an important year for a viable and vibrant ocean. I'll stop there and hand back to you, Pierre.
Thank you, Tanya, for this very kind of hopeful introduction. But if I may, The BBNJ, as you mentioned, the Global Ocean Treaty, we will come into it in a bit, but it still needs a lot of ratifications. It's still not done. Plastics Treaty, again, this was meant to be finalized last year, and that we've missed that deadline. So in terms of governance, are we stuck somewhere? What is the role of the regional and the global agreements that we have, and also the discussions that we're having? Because it seems like we are a bit stuck. So we've identified some targets with the SDGs. What is the role of the Ocean Conference? What is the role of the global agreements then, especially if we're not able to actually kind of realize them? Shall I open this? Perhaps, Francesca, would you like to come in on this point?
Thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure to be here, and also with so many important speakers and colleagues that are working, with all of us to promote a better implementation. I mean, what is really important for me to highlight is that being a person that is working on this topic for over 25 years now, it's important, first of all, to acknowledge that the ocean is finally high in the political agenda. And this was something new. This is something new. I mean, only in relation to what we were observing maybe 5 years ago. So I think, first of all, we need to somehow celebrate the fact that this community has been able to bring and put the ocean high in the political agenda, international, but also maybe local, national, regional. So this is something that I really wanted to highlight, because sometimes we tend to focus on what is not there. And of course, we are all very ambitious when it comes to ocean sustainability, and we would like to see, all important policies and decisions to be taken. But I think it's important to acknowledge that we have been able, I mean, this community all together, we've been able to get some important results, and including also, for example, the approval of the BBNJ, of the High Seas Treaty, and also the discussion that we are, currently having on the ambitions for the third UN Ocean Conference. So I think it's important that we take advantage of this moment. We take advantage of the fact that the ocean is still high in the political agenda. We know we live in a very, at the same time, in a very special moment from a political point of view. So I think it's important that we strengthen those networks that exist and the collaboration that exists in order to make sure that regardless of all the rest of the things that are happening, we are clear with the targets that we have. It's important that we highlight what are the most important things that are absolutely needed to achieve in the next months, and therefore trying to bring on board who is not yet there. So I think that's the other point that I wanted to make, that we still have to engage many more, for example, representative of the private sector, many more countries. So I think that's how I would, progress, making sure that we are clear with our targets.
Apologies for this technical interruption. This is always something that we risk, of course, but we're all back now. Francesca, sorry for this technical interruption. Please continue.
No problem.
About why UN Ocean Conference is an opportune moment, and also broadly, how are we going to get to our specific targets?
No problem at all. I mean, these kind of things happen. So yeah, as I was saying, and I think I already mentioned what are the main points that I wanted to make. I think we have some important milestones ahead of us, and the UN Ocean Conference, of course, but then maybe COP30 coming up as well. So I think it's important that we make clear what are our targets and most important targets, that we gather together the existing networks, but also that we enlarge the networks and we bring on board other people that are not yet on board. And how to do that, I think it's important that we make clear what is the role of everyone. Sometimes I find myself in conversations where it's not so clear what is the role of the sectors that we are trying to bring on board or the people that we're trying to bring on board. So I think it's important that we have a clear agenda, that we have clear roles for the stakeholders and the partners that we are trying to bring on board, and therefore we can have a clear roadmap, being aware that we have those important milestones ahead of us that can help us marking some of the important appointments that we have ahead of us.
Thank you, Francesca. Nina, would you like to come in on same point on what is the point of these global agreements that we have?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure to be part of this important exchange. And I entirely agree with Francesca. So yeah, all those global goals or forums are of course connected, and the ocean-related Sustainable Development Goal, SDG 14, Life Below Water, was a dedicated topic of the first Ocean Conference, which was then supplemented by a second UN Ocean Conference, and we've heard it all. This one, we're going to have the third one in Nice, and yeah, perhaps I can just quickly talk about the cosmopolitan meaning of those conferences before just adding a few words on what Francesca has said on the Ocean Decade already. So during the UN Ocean conferences, actually country representatives raised their concerns and challenges with regards to the ocean. And if you have listened to them during the first two conferences, you will have noticed that issues arise some people here in Europe may not even think about, such as the topic of territorial loss due to rising sea levels. That would bring along the risk of statelessness and raise challenges such as the distribution of resources and sovereignty claims with regards to shifting sea zones and submerged land masses, actually. And you would have also heard some state representatives mentioning the term global citizens, which reminds us of the cosmopolitan idea and the task of solidarity that ocean politics entails. And this solidarity is also in parts enshrined in the law of the sea. So these forums therefore play an essential role in the cosmopolitan discourse on a matter, the ocean, that concerns all of us. And these forums also unite voices that view the ocean differently. Not all countries view the ocean predominantly as an economic resource. I've heard many country representatives referring quite metaphorically to the sea as a cultural asset, talking about a human-ocean relationship that ascribes value to the ocean itself for being a life-sustaining engine. And then the UN Ocean Decade is a global campaign that brings together all parts of society. So whether you're a politician, scientist, activist, or just someone who loves the ocean, there are actually plenty of ways that can make a difference and opportunities for small-scale actors to be seen and acknowledged via mechanisms such as the Decade's call for action and its endorsement opportunities. So as it brings together the work and knowledge of various actors, it is a very crucial step to raise public awareness for our ocean. And this decade also strengthens regional commitment to the ocean and sparks initiatives. So in this respect, all of these global forums have a catalyzing effect, or can have a catalyzing effect, in order to finally dedicate a public, and here a global public, to the ocean. And I believe this is why it is so great that we are offering our ocean a European public arena today, because for transnational tasks, we need not just a national public arena, but one that can transcend borders, just like the ocean does.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you, Francesca. Let's get into the specifics now. The BBNJ Treaty has been mentioned a few times, which is also known as a Global Ocean Treaty or the High Seas Treaty, that was adopted in 2023 to better govern the high seas, which covered 2/3 of the ocean, and which is essentially beyond national jurisdiction. So recently, Spain and France have become the first EU nations to have ratified this treaty. We now need to get from those 16 or so ratifications to 60 ratifications from countries before summer for this to actually take effect. And I believe this is potentially a game changer for protecting marine areas. Is that true? Tanya, can you shed some light on this?
Yes, sure, I can do that. So this agreement is very significant because it took 20 years to negotiate. It was very difficult to get the agreement, and the way that it works is it's an implementing agreement to the Law of the Sea Convention, which is the charter really of the ocean from a legal perspective. It provides a framework document for how nations engage with the ocean and with one another in respect to the ocean. It also sets out territories. So nations have their own territories, territorial waters, and exclusive economic zones. The areas beyond that is what we call the high seas. The BBNJ is really important because this area, this part of the sea, has not really been governed properly before. It was a little bit ungoverned in a way. There was patchwork governance with RMFOs, regional fisheries management organizations, and some agreements regionally to manage certain areas, but there hasn't been a global framework in place to manage how we use the high seas. We've always operated on the principle of freedom of the seas, freedom of fishing, freedom of navigation, which is something that was born in the 16th or 17th century from Grotius, and the idea that the ocean is so big that you don't need to worry about governing it. And that's really changed, and we can see that now with the implications and cascading changes that we're experiencing. So it's a very important agreement. It has 4 different elements, which I don't think we will go into because that's unless we want to. But one of the primary areas I think will be very important is marine protected areas in the high seas. So we have some examples in the Antarctic of the Ross Sea, for example, which is one of the largest MPAs. But some of these seamounts and other very important areas in the ocean are not yet protected. And these are biodiversity hotspots. So these would be prime areas to be considering for protection. So I'm really hoping that sufficient ratifications come in time so that this can actually be implemented. If you want me to chat more about it, but I think that maybe we can move on.
I think it's good to start off on this. We'll start taking questions in about 5 minutes. So feel free to raise your hand if you have a burning question in your mind, and we'll go through that order. Just one kind of additional if I can get Pierre in now, talking about the European Union side of things, how effective are our current EU legislations for the purpose of protecting our marine biodiversity, our biodiversity hotspots in our oceans? I mean, there are numerous strategies out there. There's the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. Are they actually achieving anything?
Thanks a lot. So indeed, if you look at Europe, you get today quite a comprehensive regulatory frameworks. Let's say any pressures on ecosystems in one way or another is controlled, is guided by regulations. And in addition, you get an umbrella, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, that helps bringing the pieces together. And this is really useful. When you look at the reality of implementation, still, you see that countries, member states have made progress. There are measures taken to address some of the pressures to bring ecosystems to healthier states. But we are very, very far from what initially we thought the Marine Strategy Framework Directive would deliver. Progress has been slow for many, many reasons, partly because the directive is rather complex, because also there are challenges in connecting the Marine Strategy Framework Directive with sector policies that, on the other side, are driving sector developments, for example, fisheries, for example, renewable energies and seas, aquacultures. And sometimes there are contradictions between the efforts made on one side for supporting blue sector development and on the other side for protecting. One issue also is that many challenges at seas are inland. And so as long as you don't have an efficient policy framework inland to reduce some of the pollutions, you will have difficulties to improve the state of marine ecosystem. And if you look at ourselves, sometimes we narrow marine policies to maritime and marine ecosystems, while many other pressures come from just where we are here. I'm here in Strasbourg. I have a mobile phone. I use a computer. I use energy. I eat here. And many of these very basic activities, actions I do here have an impact directly or indirectly on the ocean. So as long as you don't target the problem at the source, you will have difficulties to solve the challenges. And the last point, maybe before I close, is that the directive remains a bit technocratically implemented, a bit far from people's mind, people's emotions. And as long as we are not able to bring the ocean to individuals, to citizens, to all elected representatives, it will be rather challenging to achieve the objective of the policy framework that we aim at.
Thank you, Pierre. Yes, I mean, clearly knowledge seems to be a bit of a gap here in terms of there's a big knowledge gap here. Indeed, if we come back to your point about the focus on maritime policies, and we're not looking at what we're doing on land impacts our seas, our ocean. So how critical is it to fix the ocean gap, and what are, for instance, the IOC UNESCO, what are you doing in terms of ocean literacy, as they call it, right? That's essentially an attempt to fix this knowledge gap. What are you doing about that, and where are the gaps there as well?
Yeah, of course, that's really the key, and I believe this is really the more and more we are finally realizing that ocean literacy is really the enabling factor for, you know, whatever we are trying to do in terms of ocean literacy. And the other day I was reading an editorial by Peter Thompson, the United Nations Secretary General Special Envoy for the Ocean, and he gave a perfect, I think, definition of ocean literacy when he said that it's there to connect the dots and inspire meaningful action. So that's really the most important point for me. And what we are trying to do here at the IOC of UNESCO is, through ocean literacy, is really not only to increase ocean knowledge, but really making sure that people are able to connect those dots that I was mentioning before. Because although, I mean, we've been discussing for years and years about integrated approach and transdisciplinary approach even now, I feel still we are working in silos. So for me, the most important gap that we have is really, again, to be able to connecting those dots. And this is absolutely essential if we want to advance on those policies that were mentioned, either on a global level or on a regional, European level. We still talk about fisheries policies. We still talk about renewable energy policies. And maybe the Ocean Pact will be this opportunity for Europe to finally have this all-encompassing view on all the issues that we are talking about here. And through ocean literacy action, for example, although, as we know, it started as an initiative that was just, between brackets, aiming at bringing more ocean topics into school. Now it is really getting a more wider approach, and this is something that we from the IOC we really push a lot for, is getting to finally have this wider approach to the society as a whole. So, for example, we not only bring ocean content into school, but we train different professionals. Last week, I was in Paris managing and implementing a training for media, for journalists, on ocean literacy. And we were discussing topics like, where do you get your reliable information from? How do you react when you receive a press release on a new report on the state of the ocean published? And a lot of journalists were completely lost, for example. They were not knowing where to get the information from, or who are the experts to contact to get reliable information. So I think this is what we have to do through ocean literacy. We have to make sure that we train young people, of course, but also professionals, finance people, private sector people, journalists, as I was mentioning before, and that we make sure that that knowledge is really transformed into meaningful action. How? Making sure that we not only pass information, or we don't only give information on the ocean, but we are empowering those professionals, those young people, to transform that ocean knowledge into action. So that's what we are doing with from the IOC of UNESCO ocean literacy work. We are paying more attention to empowering people to use ocean knowledge rather than to simply passing ocean knowledge.
Thank you, Francesca. Indeed, you mentioned media and the challenges they face. Natalie, do you want to come in here with regards to indeed what's your perspective on that as a journalist?
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks so much. And it's great to be with everyone here today. Yeah, I think Francesca laid it out perfectly in the sense of, the struggles you oftentimes find as a journalist covering kind of, I think, especially the intersection of climate change and oceans. I think especially kind of this movement to covering solutions. And I think solutions journalism is something that's increasingly gaining a lot of popularity and ground in climate journalism specifically. And what's really tricky there, I think, for many journalists is to really kind of dissect and kind of separate, the greenwashing initiatives and kind of big promises, especially from the private sector when it comes to, technology innovations. And I think it's that's where it's really important to have this kind of close collaboration with, academia and researchers and experts to really kind of filter through that. And I think that's kind of where the media comes in as a kind of, a filter there. And I think it's really important for us journalists to kind of build that critical knowledge around saying, okay, so the innovators or the creators of the solution, promise kind of big results and, it's game changing and all of these things. But, what's kind of the next level there? Are these solutions just kind of small pilot projects? Are they really scalable? So I think it's really when it comes to kind of covering that, there's definitely, I think a need for more collaboration and conversations with experts. So I think that's really, this type of space that Revolve you're looking to create and really connecting us journalists with experts. And I think, connecting us to people who can kind of help us filter through some of those those solutions, but also those big promises, whether that's around technology or policy implementation.
Thanks, Natalie. Yes, indeed, that's our ambition here at Revolve. We have a sustainability roster of experts, which includes, it comprises of different professionals from academia, from research, from practitioner side. So indeed, we'll talk a little bit more about that later on, but we're here to connect journalists with the experts, and this particular briefing is part of that endeavor. Coming back to the broader question of knowledge, and we mentioned indeed briefly schools, and we come back to schools later on, but what about also the knowledge of our policymakers? We started talking about all these treaties. Policymakers are very much at the heart of making sure that they understand how we are connected to the ocean as well. So how do we make that connection between science and policy as something that's, an agile space for action, reaction, proactive building of policies as well. So I think, Tanya, I think it might be a good moment for you to tell us a little bit about IPOS and what you're doing with IPOS.
Thank you. Thank you, Pierre. Yes, I think it's a really important question to be asking, because the decisions that we're talking about and the changes that need to be made need to be made by policymakers. They are the people that are actually going to be implementing the action. So it's critically important that they understand the issues and understand what the pathways are, what the options are for action, and what the cost benefit analyses are, or the risks of no action are. So the IPOS it's a project that's being developed, and Pierre works with me on this project. It's the International Panel Platform for Ocean Sustainability. We've just recently changed the name from panel to platform. So this is a platform which is aimed at bridging this gap, this knowledge gap that we've been talking about, and that you mentioned earlier around what is the problem? Why do we have these goals? Why do we have these global frameworks and this ambition, but we don't actually implement any of the actions to achieve the ambitions that we've collectively generated as humanity? And part of the problem, not all of the problems, but one of the problems in this disjunct between knowledge and science and action is the fact that policymakers simply cannot assimilate all of the science. They cannot integrate all of it into a solution that's complex. As Pierre said, they need to be looking and thinking about multiple different mandates, from land to ocean to economy to society to culture to whatever their priorities are. So they really need assistance to understand and assimilate what is the science saying from climate, from biodiversity, from ocean. What are the big reports saying? What does this mean in their context, in their economic situation, in their societal situation? And how do they implement practically these targets that we've all collectively agreed on? It's not that simple for them. And I think this is where one of the challenges has been. So IPOS aims to bridge that gap by providing solutions to questions from policymakers that are related to the issues in their specific country. So really a gateway for knowledge into action. Would be happy to answer more questions if we have it. I don't want to take up all the time.
Briefly, if you don't mind, actually, how will it actually achieve that?
Okay, so IPOS will operate at a central global level, but also at a decentralized level across all regions in the world at the same time. It will receive requests from states on particular implementation challenges for SDG 14, Global Biodiversity Framework targets, or BBNJ implementation and ratification. It will receive those requests. It will activate a group of experts from the local community, including private sector. You'll be happy to know, Francesca. Private sector is very important as well. Indigenous and local communities. Youth also need to have a position and a voice. And the experts from the area, as well as global experts, will respond within 1 year for a longer request and provide a state with a solution that gives them options so that they can see what the different scenarios are for different policy options that's very relevant to their context, their economy, and their legislation. There's also a rapid response tool, which will be much faster, 3 to 6 weeks responses for states. So essentially it will operate in that way. And there's a third service, just briefly, which allows for a push from society or from science to frame the issues that the state may not yet be asking, or the state may not yet know how to articulate. There's a service where civil society, youth, or scientific community can frame a question that gets published and in discussion with the state, and then can help them shape their requests.
Thank you, Tanya. It seems very, very interesting, and especially, getting a response to government's challenges within 3 to 6 weeks. I think that probably will sound exciting to a lot of people working in government as well. That's often the challenge, that knowledge is so complex. It's difficult to bring together the knowledge and therefore develop realistic and relevant reactions and policy actions as well. Thank you for that. The knowledge question will be something that we keep it open but we're very keen to kind of hear from the audience as well, the participants. I know we have a few journalists also in the room. Are there any questions in the room? Francesca, just for you to know, will be leaving in just under 10 minutes. So if you have any burning questions for Francesca or anybody else, this is the time to raise your hand. And if not, we're going to continue on with my questions, because I have plenty. All right, we'll continue on then. I think to close the section or the kind of discussion around knowledge, I think we need to talk about schools indeed. We've talked about the media as an important ally. We'll get into details about how, Natalie, you have kind of engaged in that exercise when we'll be talking about shellfish farmers in a bit. But for now, Pierre, maybe talk us through, what is the point of engaging with schools, and what is the purpose behind, introducing ocean into curricula, which is what I believe is happening in some of the projects that you're managing.
Yeah, maybe not only in the project we are part of, but many projects in the world are dealing with blue education in one way or another. And I think the first hypothesis is that you need to start, if you want adults, decision makers to change their mindset, you need to start in the early stages of development. And then schools, education, whether formal or informal, becomes a clear element of your transition and change of mindset. One element that we all face when we do school projects, when we try to bring knowledge of all types to children, is our capacity. So we can do 5 schools, we can support 10 schools in the countries. In the networks of EU Blue Schools, there are a few hundred schools that become Blue Schools in Europe, which is great. At the same time, in Europe, you have a few thousand schools that you would like to bring forward and start thinking about ocean issues or blue issues in a general way. And to do that, we have to bring our head out of the ocean, and we have to get into the education system. You need to internalize a blue conversation in the curricula, like what the work that IOC UNESCO is doing. You need to make sure that the strategies of countries on education bring a blue flavor, so it gets into the daily work, daily life of teachers, and then it goes to children. You also need to make sure that cities or municipalities that have a key role in the education system in some countries start recognizing the importance of bringing the ocean to schools. So the challenge here, and it's also the challenge for many of us when we fight for better ocean sustainability, is to internalize our conversation in the conversation of other communities, education in this particular issue. And that's what Blue Lights is aiming at. Yes, supporting more blue schools, but more importantly, internalizing an ocean conversation in the education system of European countries.
Indeed, thank you. So I believe we're trying to correct the gap that we have noticed now, I guess, because it wasn't in my curricula when I was growing up, and neither was it in yours. And indeed, so you can imagine the worldview, how it will be shifted if more and more school students start engaging with the conversation around the ocean, what it means. And most recently, I mean, I discovered myself, we are all connected, the oceans are connected, and I discovered the campaign around the Drop the S. So the fact that, the ocean is one, it is not separate oceans which have their own, specificities, and then we just kind of target our strategies individually, but indeed it's all connected. And if we look at the recent news with regards to the LA wildfires, apparently they have had an impact on the ocean as well. So very much there's a big issue of connection there. And we need to start at the very start with building that connection. Briefly, if you can tell us, what does it mean to become a blue school then, Pierre? What do you need to do for a school to become a blue school?
Let's say to become a blue school in Europe, you need to have a class, a group of children that embark on a Blue Challenge projects. That means projects where children will work on, discuss, investigate solutions, and try then to bring it forward with solution for them or solution for the territory they are living in. There are elements in the becoming a blue school that is about open schooling. So it's not only bringing the ocean to the classroom, it's also going outside to the ocean and connecting with blue stakeholders, marine sectors, fishers, whoever is in this territory is also trying to think about how to better protect the ocean and marine ecosystems. And then at the end of the day is trying to share and give visibility of a school project to the wider community. So having not only a role within the school and the education, by trying to be an ambassador to bring an ocean conversation of people, parents, community, elected representatives that are around and supporting the school. Quite nice, but as I said, when you start supporting such school projects, you realize that it requires a bit of resources if you want to support many to bring the ocean conversation forward.
Thank you. And just final point on schools, but connected more to the municipalities, you briefly mentioned that it's also important to engage with the local authorities. And I believe there's a particular community or region in Netherlands which is doing a very fine job at that. Den Helder, can you tell us a little bit more about what Den Helder municipality is doing and how they're really outstanding example of trying to engage schools and work with them in a new fashion?
Den Helder is effectively a municipality that is strongly supporting EU for Ocean and strengthening ocean literacy in Europe at a time where COVID was still with us and putting some constraints in how we could work, discuss, meet each other. There was an European Maritime Day organized in Den Helder, where the first European Blue School was officially labeled. So that was a very important landmark for us, Den Helder. And then Den Helder continued to support Blue Education, trying to bring Blue Education to the other schools of Den Helder municipalities. So at the end of the day, you would believe that every child in Den Helder during its school years would have a chance to work with and contribute to an ocean conversation in many different ways, whether discussing with fishers, creating art pieces to bring the ocean to people's mind, to bring up a bit of emotions, or working more on more scientific topics in relation to the different disciplines that children and teachers are considering during the different school years. And we hope in the future that ourselves, EU for Ocean, will put much more effort in bringing cities on board of an ocean conversation, because at the end of the day, we feel that elected representatives within the democratic governance system need to become ocean literate and get a blue minds, so the ocean progressively trickle down in the different responsibilities and mandate of cities and municipalities, because this clearly will be a big help for transitions towards healthier oceans.
Thank you, Pierre. We indeed have a little bit more information. If you're intrigued about the work that's being done with schools and municipalities, you can go onto our ocean.revolve.media page. And there's a link there in the chat now as well. You can find all the media kits for Blue Lights, EU for Ocean. These are the two specific projects looking at education and how we can integrate more knowledge about the ocean through schools. And I invite you to download those media kits, discover more about the project. Thank you. Thank you, Pierre. Nina, I think it'd be a good moment for you to come in here briefly before we change track, since we are talking about knowledge and students and young people. You've just invested the last couple of months and last year in yourself into kind of engaging with young people, and you're starting to get their input on what they understand about the ocean. Can you tell us why is it important to engage with young people in general, and how do they perceive the ocean?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, I think if we want to take the entire concept of sustainability seriously, and also the mentions of future generations and all the current agreements that count, we really have to work with the young generation and give them a say in shaping our future, and also draw on their imaginative potential to create and actually define a concept. And I believe that with our project, for instance, we seek to live up to that somewhat visionary cosmopolitan metaphor of being a blue citizen, because when we talk about blue schools and blue citizens, like so far, at least in the scientific literature, the term blue citizen is not really defined. But we do have definitions for ocean citizenship or marine citizenship that can guide us here. There's the researcher Pamela Buchan, who has defined marine citizenship as exercising the right to participate in the transformation of society's relationship with the ocean, and acceptance of responsibility to make informed decisions and choices about personal and collective actions that will contribute to a sustainable marine environment now and in the future. And the question is, why is this important? So quite often when we talk about a blue identity or an identity, there's not really this value action gap that we have when we just talk about environmental or marine attitudes. And the entire idea of working with young people and blue citizenship, or defining this concept of blue citizenship, is also based on the assumption that there is a need to promote an understanding of our interconnection. So we influence the ocean and we are influenced by it. And it is a somewhat revolutionary concept, actually, this blue citizenship idea, because when we talk about citizenship, we talk about the relationship of rights and obligations between members of society and the states, or the state to which they belong. But here we actually talk about a relationship between an individual and a space that is independent of a state. So I believe by setting this entire idea, blue citizenship, blue schools, the EU actually shows courage to imagine conceptual and practical approaches that go beyond geopolitical thinking. And young people, for instance, I mean, in our project, we're actually thinking about how can we give them a say, how could they perhaps institutionalize their role as blue citizens? Because I was talking about rights before, so there must be some means to actually articulate their claims when it comes to marine policies. But young people sometimes find it much easier to advance integrative marine protection issues because they're not yet as deeply entrenched in economic constraints. So perhaps from a young perspective, we should first address fundamental questions such as what kind of human-ocean relationship do we want? And then later on, specific implementation issues such as who is allowed to fish, where, and who does actually own the ocean, or should we have something like a common, like the principle of common human heritage, or should we rather stick to EEZs, like economic exclusive zones? I believe this will come naturally once we have declared this question of what kind of human-ocean relationship do we actually want. And this is why I believe it is very important to engage those young ones to define the concept of blue citizenship, or what it means to be a blue citizen.
Thank you, Nina, indeed. And this is something that we'll be diving into at the European Ocean Days. REVOLVE will be hosting, as part of our work with the EU Ocean Coalition, workshops and engagements to bring forth some of these ideas. So if you're interested, and in Brussels, March 3rd onwards is the week of the European Ocean Days. So please make sure to sign up and register to get more information and to really engage with these concepts of that Nina has opened up for us today. Thank you, Nina. We're going to take a little, we change track a little bit, unless there are some urgent burning questions. Let me just see if you wish to raise a question to any of our experts right now, please raise your hand. And of course, you can always reach out to us later on. This briefing is also a space for inspiration, for ideas, for stories that you might want to follow up on. So the opportunity is here right now for you to speak with experts or to follow up with us later on by email to connect with the experts that we have here today. So I think I'd like to hear more from Natalie. So Natalie has been doing some interesting work that has taken up a lot of your time last year. You've been in Spain talking to shellfish farmers. And with that, as part of that, you've been doing a little bit of an investigation into how European funds are being used and perhaps misused by and not going to the right people who need the assistance to be able to support small communities and fishing communities. So I'm going to open up the floor to Natalie for her to take us into a little bit of a case study into her investigation, and perhaps that will also create some inspiration for journalists attending today, and we'll have an opportunity to engage with Natalie after that. Natalie, over to you.
Great, thanks so much. Yes, I'm very excited to be here to be speaking to you all about an investigation that I've been working on for a better part of a year now. And yeah, let me just see if I can get the slides up here. Let me know if you can see them. But yeah, it was really, this kind of came about from speaking to the people who I think are really on the front lines of the climate crisis. And I think the local fishing communities, they're really kind of the ones feeling these impacts first. This is their workplace. This is where they spend every day. And they are often the ones to kind of sound alarm bells about the state of the ocean. And they know what's going on really almost before policymakers and even researchers. So as a journalist, I found it very useful to kind of, be in close touch with these communities and kind of hearing their side of the story. So yeah, as we mentioned earlier, we've been working on this investigation for over a year now, and it was really looking at how climate change is impacting small-scale shellfish producers in Southern Europe, but also why kind of billions in EU funds isn't really reaching them. And it started out with kind of this more local story. And a couple of years ago, we went to a community called Delta del Ebro. That's about kind of 2 hours south of Barcelona, where I'm based. And we were interviewing mussel farmers there who were basically seeing entire harvests, a year's worth of work kind of just destroyed by heat waves in the summer. And this has become increasingly frequent. So we also started asking ourselves kind of, is this a national-wide event? Is it even kind of a cross-border issue? So together with two other journalists, Naomi Mihara, who's also based here in Spain, and Vittoria Torsello, who's in Italy, we applied for a grant with Journalism Fund Europe to really kind of dig a little bit deeper into this investigation and, ask this question in other places too. And it also ended up having this kind of follow the money part. So there is the European Maritime Fisheries and Aquaculture Fund that's dispersing 6 billion. It also has a previous iteration that ran up to 2021. That was another 6 billion. And the aim of this fund is really to support sustainable fisheries, strengthen coastal communities, and protect marine biodiversity. So when we started to approach this investigation, we were asking, is it really kind of fulfilling that aim? And our hypothesis was that it's not really fulfilling that. So yeah, I think the first layer of the investigation and a lot of climate stories kind of dive deeper into the climate impact. So speaking to the communities, they were telling us what they were living day by day. But as a freelance journalist, whenever I speak to editors and kind of, pitch stories, what I've increasingly noticed is that there's an appetite to go beyond just reporting on the impacts and also kind of, unpeel the other layers of the onion. Hence, there's this little onion emoji here, but really looking at kind of, other layers beyond just those kind of more striking impacts, but also looking at kind of the policy angle. How are these issues felt by communities? How are they being addressed? who needs to be held accountable for inaction, but also kind of looking at solutions and some of the things that I mentioned earlier, kind of applying almost like a critical lens to those solutions, but also looked at what has worked and if it can be scaled and used elsewhere, really. So yeah, what we found was really, really striking when it came to kind of how this money was used. And a little bit, just a little bit about the methodology. We did underground reporting in Galicia, so kind of in the north of Spain on the Atlantic coast, as well as in Taranto, Italy. And it was just, weeks there kind of speaking to these shellfish farmers. You have a photo here of one of the women who is an on-foot shellfish picker in Galicia. So in the mornings when the tide is low, they actually just go on the beaches and kind of pick barnacles and cockles and other shellfish from the shore directly from the sand. And this kind of underground reporting was really coupled with online interviews with different experts who were able to kind of also guide us towards, how to interpret some of the kind of EU policies. And it also had this data-driven part. So we were able to come across this 900-page PDF from the Ministry of Agriculture here in Spain, which is kind of the managing entity of this fund. And of the 6 billion, Spain was the biggest recipient. They received over 1 billion. And this document kind of had a list of all of the projects, all of the entities and all of the individuals who had benefited from this EU funding. So yeah, we had a great time kind of extracting some of that data using a tool called Tabula, putting it into an Excel format so that we were really able to kind of organize the data, the funding data, kind of with, the largest amounts and really looking at, where are some of these millions going? And I think, looking into that type of funding data as a journalist, I find it very useful. Public funding is, of course, limited. So it's really important, I think, for us to really investigate how well this money is spent and also who it benefits. So yeah, we were kind of deep down into that data, and there was definitely kind of a few interesting things that came out of that. I think on the impact side of things, shellfish producers were talking to us about how they're already experiencing climate change and extreme weather events. There was a heat wave, a marine heat wave in December 2023 that was also coupled with a very, very rainy fall, which decreased the salinity levels of the different deltas and estuaries in Galicia. And actually that December, 95% of Galicia's cockles and 75% of the clams died due to these circumstances. So I have this graph here that shows the amount of kilos that went to local fish markets. So it's basically kind of a representation of how much shellfish was there in any given month. And you can see these really high peaks tend to be in December, because here in Spain, we love to have shellfish on the table during the holidays. So it's really kind of a peak in demand and production. So you can see for the other years, the peak is really high in December. But then if you look at December 2023, it's really, really low. And then there was the crash with this kind of climate event, and the stocks really never really recovered. So a lot of the shellfish producers that we talked to, they were telling us stories of how some of them they weren't able to work for 10 months. And even though this European fund explicitly says that, it's meant to build the resilience of communities in the face of climate change, the money can be used to kind of fund seas of activities during extreme weather events. But a lot of them were just not able to access that money. So instead, we started looking at, where is that money going then? And what we found was that really a lot of it was going to big industrial players rather than these small scale producers. So millions went for example, for the construction of new factories and processing plants for different actors in the industry, was building kind of new freezing plants and yeah, a lot of construction work. There was also about 5.4 million awarded to local government officials to travel to different conferences in faraway places. There was also quite a few projects allocated for construction of tourism accommodation, a boutique hotel, and also for kind of engine upgrades and the purchasing of new boats. And what becomes problematic there is that it's actually kind of increasing the production capacity. So instead of kind of preserving these marine resources and really, emphasizing that resilience piece, it's actually kind of encouraging and overproduction and kind of making it really hard for these small producers to survive. So yeah, I think a lot of the issues came down to the complex application processes. When we spoke to the European Commission, they kind of deferred that responsibility to the member states in the sense of making that money more accessible to small-scale producers. But yeah, it was, it's been a really fascinating project and definitely something that is still ongoing and that will continue to follow. But yeah, I think just to wrap up, I wanted to kind of share a bit of my thinking when I approach a climate story and really those layers that I mentioned of kind of looking and reporting on the climate impacts, but then also going kind of to those deeper levels of looking at the policy, the accountability part of it, especially when it comes to funding and how that's spent, but also the solutions and kind of the, how they can be scaled. And some of the questions that I like to ask when I'm looking for stories or kind of starting to build out a story or an investigation is really, what is happening in coastal communities? Is this public funding actually leading to the intended results? Is it benefiting vulnerable groups? Who should be held accountable for inaction? And what solutions are working and can they be scaled? So yeah, I think actually the European Ocean Days and the EU, the UN Ocean Conference in Nice later this year, they're really good hooks for pitching editors. If you're a freelance journalist like me, making sure that these issues are timely and kind of at the top of the agenda. So yeah, I think I'll wrap it up there. But if you have any questions, I think we'll have some time now to take some of them. And if there's anything else you'd like to get in touch with, I've just left my email on the screen there. But yeah, thanks everyone. And let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you for your work alongside your team. Indeed, it's a team effort, as you acknowledge as well. And there are some helpful pointers there for potentially people who are looking for story ideas. And indeed, that's why we're hosting this briefing in this particular year, as there are so many conferences and key moments and milestones coming up. Those are excellent opportunities to raise the alarm bell, engage with the communities to understand where are the big challenges and also potentially indeed solutions that are coming out as well. I don't know if the panelists or anybody else has any questions for Natalie. Otherwise, no? All right. That's perfectly fine. Thank you very much, Natalie. I want to come back to some of the specific questions around kind of our marine hotspots and some of the targets also. So we started talking about, we have all these targets, we have ambitions. How are we actually doing with some of that? And which are the countries which are actually leading in ocean sustainabilities and who's potentially falling behind? And I'd also like to look a little bit in kind of from a solution-oriented perspective as well. So maybe Tanya, can you share a few good examples of countries and maybe regions that are actually progressing on the ocean sustainability agenda?
Thank you. It's not a straight line to answer that question because it depends on what you're looking at and with which lens you're looking, and which what your priorities are. So I think it's very difficult to compare countries with countries. One very elementary way of comparing SDG progress is to look at the SDG 14 sustainability, the Sustainability Development Goal Report, which I looked at this morning as a matter of interest to see if any countries are sort of sticking out more than others with ocean sustainability. What is interesting to note that on a global scale, SDG 14 is still declining. It's still red over the down arrow as a global perspective. So the ocean is in a state of decline. I looked at the countries that have the only 2 countries in the world that actually had an arrow going, a green arrow showing up, which means that they're on track for sustainability, were really unlikely candidates. That was Montenegro and Jordan, which I found really interesting. And they're not very high on the sustainability agenda rating overall, but those 2 countries are the only ones that have some green progress on their sustainability on 14. But I think it's largely to do with the state of the ocean is still relatively unspoiled, because on the Ocean Health Index, which is a way of measuring ocean health, which is the most effective holistic way that we have to just quickly assess how healthy is a part of the ocean in one part of the world. The Ocean Health Index is a great resource to use. They look at 9 different elements, including culture and places of significance, cultural significance, and then also the obvious metrics. And both of those countries had very high scores, sort of 80 and 72.9, which is why they were the only ones actually showing an indicator. So nobody is really doing that well on ocean sustainability in the world right now. There are countries that have more advanced frameworks, like Pierre went through the EU frameworks and the directive, which is wonderful. But there are some countries that have no ocean policies or no traction whatsoever. It's not even on the agenda really, or in the national development plans. There's so much more work to do to elevate the ocean. And I think Francesca mentioned this earlier, that the ocean's only been on the agenda for the last few years. But on a global scale, at a climate agenda, ocean wasn't even there. Which, if you think about the things we were talking about at the beginning, it's bizarre. The ocean regulates the climate. The ocean is the regulator of the climate, but we were having climate conventions and doing all this climate science without looking at the ocean. So it makes no sense, which is why we're a little bit behind and we have lots of catching up to do.
In our previous conversation, Tanya, you mentioned briefly about Seychelles and Belize. They were doing some interesting things. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, of course. There are lots of exciting innovations that are happening around the world where countries are leading on different elements. So Belize is a nice example of how a science, policy, society interface can actually lead to an effective action. What they did in Belize was they had one of their coral reefs was on the IUCN endangered list as really at risk. And so what they did was they did a very inclusive process of a bottom-up approach with communities to hear how the reef should be managed, and a top-down approach from government with private sector and with society and with scientists. And they developed a policy to manage the way that they were using the space. And actually, really quickly, I think within 3 years, they were off the endangered list. The reef was off the endangered list. So it's a very powerful example of how it can work if you get all the right stakeholders on board. Seychelles are interesting because they have obviously a very beautiful, diverse ocean still, and very healthy ocean. And what they've done is they were the leading country to start the Nature for Debt swap, the blue bond. They issued the first blue bond that was ever designed in the world. I'm not an expert on blue bonds, but my understanding is that they created value for their ecosystem that they could then use for other development processes or to offset other debt that they have. And please jump in, Pierre, if you want to add anything to this. But they were the first country to really say we value the ocean from an economic perspective. And that's what's been missing largely as well, is that we've taken nature for granted in our pricing, in the way that we design our systems. We've just assumed that we can use and use and use and not account for it. So the shift towards actually valuing the ocean is critically important. So that was also a very interesting example. And there are many innovations, small ones and really big ones. I mean, there's one quick one I'd love to tell you if we have 2 minutes. It's called Whale Safe. It's my favorite example of what you can do with human imagination. It's an app that layers 4 different levels of technology, from citizen science to scientists looking at patterns of where the whales come in, to ship speed and shipping lanes, to a captain's decision on the boat. And what it does in the San Francisco Bay Area, it overlays all of this data and technology, and it gives the captain a warning to say you're on a strike zone for a whale. And the captain then has a choice, a human agency, to say, I can slow down to 10 nautical miles, because apparently at that speed, whales can leave. That's been shown by NOAA, that they can get out of the way. And if the ship captain has the agency to decide whether he will have a whale strike or a high likelihood of a whale strike. Also, the cool thing is that the whale song, the whale sound, is recorded. So that's one of the indicators that there are whales in the area. So the whales have agency too. So there's a very nice layering of different types of data and information that can come together for a very practical solution. So a small innovation that's really, I think, very beautiful.
Thank you, Tanya. Pierre, do you want to shed some light on what's happening on the European side? Perhaps how are we doing on the North Sea front, closer home?
Yeah, I think
Are there some good stories to tell from the North Sea?
There are always good stories, let's say, from the North Sea, but as Tanya said, it always depends on which glasses you put and to look at the experiences. Maybe I can start with a simple one, which is the marine protected areas and the target of 30 times 30, the 30%. I would say if you look in Europe, you would see that are countries, let's say Germany, Belgium, France, that are around the 30% or above the 30% target. So which is great. But on the other side, you would find countries, for many reasons, sometimes good reasons also, they are below the 10% of marine protected areas. In brackets, many countries are using or designating Natura 2000 sites as marine protected areas as a first place. So you feel there are goods and bads. And sometimes there are reasons, including ecological reasons, why you designate a few of your marine areas as protected areas. So you need to investigate a bit further. What is maybe more important is not so much designating, is managing these sites. And then the experience and the knowledge you have shows that, in fact, the majority of these sites are poorly managed. And there are some exceptions, some good practice, but on average, that's where efforts are required if you want honestly to comply with the ambition. And it goes back a bit to what Tanya said and with the start of the discussions. Are we ratifying? Are we designating? Yes, and you see more countries doing. But if you don't put the resources and the conditions to ensure that afterwards actions are taken, then you have not gained very much in this process. And as Natalie said, a lot is about transparency, accountability, and traceability. And if you don't put in place the mechanisms that allow you to track and to check effectively what countries are doing, I think, or countries or stakeholders or sectors, then you have not gained very much with the framework that is in place. And that's one of the reasons why in EU for Ocean, from a discussion that started as ocean literacy discussion, I bring the knowledge to people so they can act, they can take informed decision. We are bringing on the table the issue of citizenship literacy, which is your role, your responsibility in a system to influence, including the decision of democratic institutions, to make sure that at the end of the day, if I go back to the example of Natalie, there is a fair, just, and inclusive allocation of resources to support the transformation. So that's where the challenge is for us today. And in looking at the Ocean Pact ahead of us, we'll see how much the pact itself will put on the table the transformation so we deliver this just, inclusive, and fair ocean policy-making framework.
Thank you, Pierre, indeed. Natalie, do you want to come in here, or Nina?
I would actually like to come in with a question for Pierre, because I've been kind of really interested in looking at specifically the management of marine protected areas. And as you said, you know, some countries being really good at designating, but less so when it comes to the management. So, you know, are there even any good examples around, you know, countries that have kind of gotten the management side right? and what have you seen are normally kind of the biggest gaps when it comes to, not just designating, but actually, making sure that management is there. Anything you can share, any kind of interesting examples?
Yeah, I don't have the example in mind, but I can share it with you later. From memory, because it dates a bit, you see that there are good examples that are built on a co-building process of the rules, associating different stakeholders to ensure ownership in the rules. So there is slightly higher chances for the rules to be applied. Then if there's a second issue you can look at, it's effectively how much resources is put for management. Let's say people, financing, whatever you put under resources. And that shows that in some cases, you would get a single person having to do so many tasks and play so many functions without necessarily the competencies to apply some of the rules that are established, that shows that it's impossible to deliver proper management. You find examples in the Mediterranean Sea, for example, I could share with you where there is very nice processes established. And I guess you would find some similar example if I go back to Tanya, what Tanya mentioned, over the world where, in fact, the right conditions that can deliver management are in place. The trend today, if you look at countries like France, is not putting more resources to management of ecosystem and ecological protections. There are quite big debates today about sectors, agriculture, fisheries versus protections, and the role of institutions there. There are discussions about reducing the controls, reducing how you ensure traceability of change of practices. So it's not very clear whether this is the right political context that will allocate more resources for the protection of marine ecosystems.
Thanks, Pierre. Tanya, you want to come in here?
Yes, I think it's really interesting, this conversation, and it's a great question, Natalie. And I think two things. One is that there's a great example of what Pierre is just talking about, getting local community to buy in Africa, in Kenya. There was it's called a locally managed marine area, but it's essentially a marine protected area that's designated in the county. They have counties, and it's managed by the community, and it's called Kiruwitu, K-I-R-I-W-I-T-U, Kiruwitu. It was the first locally managed marine area that was formalized in Kenya, and it was incredibly successful. At the beginning, there was a lot of resistance from the community because they felt like they were giving up their rights to their traditional space and their traditional fishing grounds. But after understanding and after some process of capacity building and education and ocean literacy, they gave it a try, and it was so successful that there was so much abundance that occurred outside of the zone because of the protection. So there was shelter, there was juvenile fishery, there was a capacity for the ocean to regenerate itself, and there was such a spillover of abundance of fisheries around the reef, and income of fishers, I think, tripled within 3 years. Just check the numbers, but it's a really nice example of local buy-in with a very, very good on-the-ground NGO that was helping manage the process. Very effective. And then the other point, which is completely the other end of the spectrum of what I've just been talking about, is that managing marine protected areas is changing because of technology, and it's becoming. So, for example, we have Global Fishing Watch, which is now also able to not only track big vessels, but also to track very small traditional vessels, even local fishermen. It can track where there's an illegal fishing happening because they can see the refrigeration vessel sitting there, and to the mothership, they call it the mothership, and then these other vessels going and catching where they're not supposed to catch, bringing the fish in. So we're starting to have more surveillance. They can even tell the weight of the vessel in the water, so they know if there's been a catch. And there's some compliance, voluntary compliance around having cameras on board, which some companies are starting to do. So there also there's a lot of development with technology, which is going to change which will help monitoring, because obviously the resources to monitor your whole coast it's really difficult, especially for under-resourced countries. So I think this is going to start changing with technology, but it's very important what Pierre is saying. It's the monitoring and evaluation. Without that, it's all just hot air. I think, it's.
Thank you, Tanya. Thanks, Natalie, for your question as well. We have just 4 minutes, and there was a question from the participant, Walid. He's an assistant professor in geography and earth sciences from Algeria, and they'd like to know about implementing an ocean literacy strategy in their country. Could you advise them about the most important points and actions to fulfill in order to increase ocean awareness and sustainability? Perhaps, I guess, Pierre, if you'd like to give it a go. You have 2 minutes, though.
Yeah, and thanks a lot for the questions. I'm not going to give you the solutions. I'll just give you 2 ideas. The first idea is for us to be able to change people's mind so it becomes a bit more blue minds, is to try to reach everybody with what matters for them. Too often we come from an ocean perspective. And it means finding the right hook from a content or from the mechanism to reach people that help them to think about the ocean. In the European Maritime Day 2025 in Cork, we are using sounds, music, and noises as the mechanism to start discussing about the ocean. And we hope that with traditional Irish music, with experimental music, let people hear whales or hear noises from maritime sectors. We hope that we can start to help them think about the ocean and understand this human-ocean relationship as a way to think how we could do differently. Second advice is, or idea, is do not think ocean literacy start and is on the coast, and try to bring the conversation everywhere. We organized for a couple of years an event for ocean literacy in Strasbourg, and the name of this event was The Ocean Starts in Strasbourg. And in fact, the ocean starts in everybody's city for many, many different reasons. And if you try to bring these conversations, whether demonstrating that what I do here in Strasbourg via rivers will influence the state of the ocean, via what I eat, what I use, will influence maritime transport, will influence the development of energy in the ocean, then I start to be able to reconnect people with the ocean and its importance. So 2 ideas, not a strategy. The important is not to think that ocean literacy is just an education discussion. It's a discussions with everybody, and in particular with elected people. We assume decision makers with better knowledge will change their decisions. This is not always true. You need to make sure that decision makers have a blue mind to be able to get different information to change their decisions. And this is also an ocean literacy conversation.
Thank you very much, Pierre, for these inspiring words. Walid says thank you as well for your ideas. You can definitely get much more input from and follow up online on our websites of all of our different projects, EU4Ocean Coalition, the Blue Lights, to help you understand a little bit more about blue education itself, if you're seeking more ideas. I'd like to thank all the participants and the expert panelists. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for sharing your expertise, your knowledge, your inspiration, and your ideas. I hope this has been a valuable session for all. Like I said earlier, we have a new resource page called ocean.revolve.media. Please go there, discover new ideas, facts, and connect with our experts, and we're happy to make those connections possible for you. We have a host of more interesting and exciting projects coming up soon, which talk about also the cryosphere as well, the frozen parts of our Earth, and how ice water interacts with atmospheric air and what that means for climate change as well. Cryoscope, that's the name of that new project. So we have a host of exciting projects coming up, and we'll hope you stay tuned for more on that. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon and take care.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks to everybody. Thanks a lot.